So, Azadeh, it's a pleasure to have you on. I think a natural place to start our conversation is around entrepreneurship, right? You've co-founded a company called VitalTracer, which we're going to speak quite in detail about. But before we talk about your company and your vision behind it, I'd be curious to get a little bit of sense of you as a person as to what made you want to start a company. So, what led you down this entrepreneurship path?
Um, Thank you for having me today. Actually, when I was 7 years old, I really know that I really want to be an innovator. But in terms of entrepreneurship, I saw my mom as a businesswoman and my dad as a businessman, and they were having like a roller coaster life, and I was like, it's too stressful. I don't want to have it. And I told my mom that I want to stay home and be household when I was growing up. But she said that we will see. So when I started my company, when I started, it was my master and PhD thesis, and it wasn't that company. But when a friend of mine who has his own startup suggested me, I was like, okay, I will accept it to be a CTO and you play the role of CEO. But after a couple of months, he withdraw his position because he wanted to concentrate on his company, and I had no choice except to accept the role of CEO. So it's just like a forced version. And but I started going to different workshops and different like taking different accelerator programs to learn about it and how to be good about it.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting path. Maybe so. Talk about a little bit about your master's and your PhD. What led you to wanting to research, obviously, your area, and we'll talk about wearables and what you're trying to solve. But yeah, I'd like to hear you more on the academic front.
Yeah. So when I started my master, it was in 2010, and I needed a topic of thesis, and I was not sure that what topic do I want to work. But at the same time, my dad got diagnosed with a high blood pressure, and he doesn't really like the devices that is cuff based and goes around his arm, inflate and deflate. So then I Google it to find if there is a wearable. There wasn't wearable, like a cuff-less blood pressure. I talked with my supervisor, and he really liked the idea. So I started to design a cuff-less blood pressure monitoring device. And then I did a lots of literature review and scientific articles, and like understand that the cuff is the main source. If we eliminate it, what we need to do using optical sensor instead of mechanical, and then applying machine learning on it to make it more accurate.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. At one point, did you get a sense that this is something that could be commercialized, right? That's just not just research and science, but an actual product people will buy.
Yeah, it was on 2014 when a friend of mine who has his own startup approach and say that, look, it has a really good market. I Google it, you search it and see that there's nothing in a market, and it has a huge potential because one at that time 1/4 of adults suffer from high blood pressure, and nowadays it's 1/3 of adults suffer from high blood pressure, and it's like a 1.56 billion of people, which is a really huge number. And it's not only about the money, because it's more about the health concern that I have for my dad. So I really wished all parents could live longer and healthier and independent.
Yeah, and so you mentioned the year, right? So it's like, a lot of people get into startups thinking it's a quick buck and a quick win. You've been doing this for many years now, right? So maybe that's a good segue for us to talk about your startup and Vital Tracer and like one of these like 10-year overnight successes, right? That's taken a while. Curious, so like, yeah, what is Vital Tracer? You've spoken obviously about the idea behind your dad that had high blood pressure. So that embryo of an idea of like creating a wearable, where has it led you today, and like a sense of scale of your company?
Yeah, so the project started because of my dad issue and my master, and it was 2010. So it 3 years took to read 500 articles and literature in science to understand what is the issue and how to solve it potential theoretically. And then it took 2 years to apply the codes, and then 2 years to build the hardware itself, 2 years to test the hardware and do a data acquisitioning. And then now we have not only MVP, we build the alpha prototype, then beta prototype, then run a pilot study. Getting a permission from Health Canada took a year. And now we are in a phase that testing this technology on a real patient at a hospital.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's one of these like I guess I've worked a little bit with startups in the medical space. It's like it takes a lot of work up front before you hit the actual revenue phase. What's your ambition for the company in the sense of like where would you want to take it? Have you given a thought to like post revenue and like raising money? Like give us a sense and a sense of like yeah where you want to take the company. Maybe I'll double click on that after.
Yeah, sure. So we officially established our company in 2019 in terms of the running a business in Quebec, especially. And but even in 2019 till 2020, or even the more than a year, we just went to different accelerator to understand more about how to run a business, so how transfer the research to the real business in terms of startups, and understand the startup ecosystem, how to write a business plan, and so on. And so right now that we are in a stage of running our first clinical validation in a real hospital on a real patient, I think that it's going to take, usually in a medical device, it took a year or 2 years to finalize the clinical validation. Then it's like a year or 2 years to get a FDA and Health Canada clearance. So it's not going to be in the market for the next 3 to 4 years, definitely. But
So Azadeh, maybe on that front, when you were talking about like wearable device, right? So I understand, having listened to some of your interviews, I understand the difference between an Apple Watch and what you're doing. But let's say for the layman in layman's terms, you have a medical device which you need approval for from the FDA, Health Canada. The Apple Watch doesn't. So explain us the difference between what yours does versus like an Apple Watch.
Okay, so the main differentiation between us and Apple Watch are in a different category. First of all, that they are selling to the individual, so they are B2C, business to consumers, and we are B2B, business to business. So we are selling to the hospital and senior home. And our technology is a medical device, but their technology is like a gadget for wellness and fitness. So they're selling their technology to the individual, healthier and more fashion, but we are selling this technology for seniors and the people who suffer from a chronic disease, which is hypertension now. So very different target market.
Yeah.
And the way that we are, our cloud saving our data, that we are using hospital servers, so we don't own any confidential information, but bigger players like Apple, Fitbit, and Samsung, they can't do it because this is not on based on automatizations. They need to come in a hospital and set up a server and so on. And the main value is data, and we don't want to own data because this is all confidential. And on the other hand, they don't have clearly blood pressure, and based on the new publications that Apple made, that it won't they won't have it until at least 2 years. So it's very complicated scenarios for the blood pressure to have a really really accurate result. And we had a background of 12 years experience in R&D in a specific very niche of hypertension.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating because it's like you're really at I want to say the cutting edge of digital healthcare, right? Like this doesn't exist today, even if like like obviously Apple might market it in a certain way, but is there when you're collecting your data, is there any value in preventative care? Because you obviously if people have hyper, you said you're going after a different target market, but let's say for people that are in shape that are not necessarily of that market, will there be a benefit of wearing a Vital Tracer from a preventative aspect, or is that not really applicable today?
Prevention is our favorite parameters that we are working, but Right now, we do not claim our device as a prevention technology, because prevention in a medical device is a class 4, which is the highest risk. And to have a technology who could prevent any kind of diagnosing like a heart failure for hypertension, it is theoretically possible and very easy by having a trackable device for a couple of years, and can track it daily versus at night while the subject is asleep. But this technology will be developed while the different people's using it for at least 5 years. So prevention is on our track, but this is not something that we are going to claim for the next 5 years. Definitely.
Yeah, so it's like it's a long process, right?
That's
How maybe an industry question, because like it's rare I speak to like PhD level people that are also running startups in this space. How early are we in your estimation in this whole digital healthcare space, right? So exactly like a startup like VitalTracer that is really seeking to augment people with technology, software, machine learning to be able to help their health. Are we like 0.1% of the way? Are we 20%? Like curious to see like how you map the world in terms of like where how early we are.
So it's really different sector by sector. Like youth are more digitalized versus the um, more mature adult. Let's say not senior. They don't like the word of senior. And but in term of, come on, let's talk about a government, because in Canada the health is like a public health, and it's under government. It's too old version, too old. We are still the only way of communication from hospital to hospital, from any healthcare to healthcare. We are still using fax. They don't accept anything than fax machine, and they don't accept any emails transaction or transferring any kind of data except the paper to paper. And when the patient is not owning their data, so I went to a hospital and asked for x-ray for my daughter to bring it to doctor. They said, "I no, please give us the fax number of doctor, we will do it." It's like, thank you. So they are very old, and it might need another health crisis to push government to make it more digitalized. Surprisingly, in a senior homes in Canada, they are still use pen and paper to get the vital signs tracking. And in lots of medical doctors, if you go, they still use a paper files. So we are very, very, very old fashioned in the healthcare. It might need seriously like a 10 years to be in digitalized area. But US is much more like using like in COVID, they shifted to more digitalized health, but in Canada they are more conservative.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit depressing to hear you talk as a day about like how far behind we are, and I think obviously everyone's side with COVID, right? Where it's like the system was built, like in the last century, and we're nowhere near using the tools like a Vatal Tracer and like companies like what you guys are doing. So yeah, there's it's on the good front. There's opportunity for companies like yourself. Have you raised funding? Are you considering funding? Are you beating away investors from your product that like from investing in you? Like, curious to hear you.
Yeah, we raised $1 million, all non-dilutive, from family and friends and government grants. But in terms of VCs and equity, we haven't. But we are gonna open our first round after we get the first result of our clinical validation. So we are waiting for like a 4 to 5 months. We will receive our first initial phase of result, and then we are gonna open our round something around October, November this year.
Yeah. You mentioned your parents, right? And like the problem with your father. Is that what drives you to want to do this? Like what's the purpose that your personal purpose behind the startup?
Yeah, my dad is not only my dad, but he's my like a very best friend and my mentor and my coach, and I did everything in my life with my dad. So he was the main reason that I really started this project. But he passed away in 2016 due to cancer, and I couldn't really help him on that part, unfortunately. But I really wish the other people's parents live longer and independent and healthier, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry to hear. My condolences. I didn't know. Like reading your story, I assumed your father was still alive. So yeah, it's a very touching personal story, and I think that's the hell of a motivator, right? Being able to do what you're doing. Yeah, and I find what you're doing is also for me falls in this category. Like I like to call tech for good, and it's a term that's been around for a while. It's like, hey, using technology, but for good. Like not that there's a bad thing with like social media or enterprise software, but there's also there's health that's a little bit more important than let's say TikTok. Like a bit lower down on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like making sure that we're not suffering from high blood pressure and we're able to live happy and healthy lives. And that's, I think, one of the cool things about technology is it can help us get there a little bit faster. um, how big do you mention the that the US is more advanced? Like, how big do you think the opportunity is for your startup? Is there room to grow beyond the borders here? Other markets? Curious to hear about growth prospects and the growth strategy.
Yeah, comparing the whole Canada versus California alone, California market is much more larger than the whole package of Canada, and in terms of demanding, it's much more need there. They have a more money there. The fees and angels in here, unfortunately, especially in medical areas, especially in medical device, they are super conservative. They don't want to invest until they see the final results of clinical validation. This means that we had no choice except put like our personal investment in this company to make it happen on that stage.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, being conservative, and it's also because I think I see maybe I have a very silo perspective. I invested in one wearable startup called Exoskin almost 10 years ago, and they're still chugging along. They're still doing well. It takes a while to get these products to market. You mentioned especially when you need regulatory approval. Because it's not like, hey, let's launch an app and it's in the app store next week or whatever. These things take time, and sometimes for good reason, because it's people's health, right? So, but it's the yin and the yang of both. Um, on the product innovation front, like as you're pursuing, obviously, your studies, but also like kind of like doing the startup. How have you thought about other use cases in terms of what you're able to do, and maybe miniaturizing it beyond just the risk? So curious to hear about the innovation possibilities of your company.
Yes, exactly. So, monitoring a patient is like a remote health monitoring is a one of the very good opportunity in this market. But it's not only for adult, but this technology is very important and could be very uh, life saving in terms of children. So, for example, in a children when they're going to their ICU, which is NICU and PICU, all the wires goes around them to monitor their cardiac, their oxygen level, and lots of them. Especially for new moms who have a newborn, it's very hard for them to, after an ICU, do a breastfeeding, changing diaper, do a skin to skin with all those lots of wires. This technology, which is gonna be a wireless all-in-one technology, it's gonna stick on the chest of the newborn, and it's really easy to use it. And the technology transfer it to the nursing station in case of abnormality. You can use in a ER for while the children's are waiting. It's waiting hours is 14 hours, and it can give a more better insight in terms of diagnosing as well.
Yeah, you're bringing back some memories. My wife used to be a NICU nurse, so neonatal intensive care unit. Like, so I remember, when you first started dating, she was like on the clinical side and visiting, premature babies. Like, and the size of my hand essentially, right? So like 24, 25 week old and stuck with tubes and it almost looking like alien like, even though like I don't want to say it as in a derogatory term, but very kind of like not normal because they're born so premature. So it's interesting to hear you speak about, hey, like, the way we do that kind of medicine is also, there's also room for innovation. Maybe a question about wearables, right? Because I find a lot of people invest in trends, right? So like IoT wearables, now it's Web3, etc. But wearables have been around for a while, and now it's kind of lost the sex appeal, let's say, of, oh, it's cool. What's your thought about the state of wearable tech today? Like, is it something that you think it's going to become more ubiquitous, or is it more niche and vertical, like what you're doing with VitalTracer?
So wearables, it's very hot topic, but I do remember when I last year when I was pitching in front of VCs, they thought Canadian VCs, they thought about the market is very saturated. And of course, in terms of wearables, we have like a big players that no one could compete with them in terms of Apple, Fitbit, Samsung. But these are all wearables in terms of the watch, and it's still very different markets and different application in terms of wearables as a gadget for health track or wearables as a prescribed medical device. In terms of medical device, it's not that much available in the market, especially for patient remote monitoring. I can say that it's only one or two outside in market in Canadian and US market, and to do it all in one, the rest is not. They are all stuck in a regulatory aspect or failed.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's a, low success rate, but the ones that work can work on a massive scale, right? Which, inshallah, is something that VitalTracer is going to have great success with. And yeah, just best of luck, continued success as a day with your startup. I love your time today. I really learned a lot. Maybe a final question for you would be: is if people want to learn more, get in contact. I know we can't use the product yet, but hopefully soon, and not 5 years. So yeah, what's the best way to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, we are super active in on our LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out me or directly follow our LinkedIn at VitalTracer, our website vitaltracer.com, and yeah, feel free to reach us there. We are super active.
Thank you so much for your time, Azadeh. This was great.
My pleasure.